Spring Hill, Florida wore Christmas Eve like a warm sweater in 2021. Porch lights glowing red and green. Cul-de-sacs quieting after church services. Families stacking presents under trees. Inside one of those homes, 18-year-old Ariana Tarczynski was doing exactly what an oldest daughter should be doing on a holiday. Drifting between the living room and the kitchen. Teasing her 12-year-old sister about a movie choice. Checking her phone. Basking in the little triumphs of the week. She'd just gotten her driver's license 4 days earlier. She had her first job at Hobby Lobby and was excited in that all-caps way parents remember forever. Her first boyfriend, 20-year-old Ramon Calderon Durst, had come along to celebrate and planned to crash on the couch. It was the kind of Florida night that invites small, forgettable moments. Ariana's dad, Eddie, tinkered in the garage before heading to bed. Her mom, Judy, had already turned in. Across the street, neighbors slipped gifts beneath branches that drooped with tinsel. Nothing about the hour before midnight felt like a hinge in time. Then, sometime around the day's edge, just at or after midnight, the house erupted. Eddie would later say he heard his name screamed from the hallway. He stepped out to find a scene no parent can prepare for. His daughter at the threshold, blood pouring from a deep cut across her neck, eyes wide with shock, unable to speak. There are details that stick in trauma. For Eddie, it was the color, everywhere, and the way Ariana seemed to be trying to talk through it as if pure will could knit a wound closed. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. The recording caught a father's voice breaking in real time. "My daughter's bleeding. Her neck is cut." In the background, another voice, a young man's, blurted about messing up, about a knife, about how everything was suddenly over. Neighbors, 4 houses down, heard the chaos and sprinted into the yard. One of them, hands already shaking, would recall a young man coming out of the house with his clothes soaked, Eddie shouting, "You killed her," and a stunned retort. Something like, "What does it matter? I'm going to jail anyway." Paramedics and deputies converged. Ariana was rushed to the hospital with a catastrophic throat wound. Back at the house, the protocol that always looks cruel from the inside clicked into place. Secure the scene, separate witnesses, preserve hands for gunshot or knife residue, collect clothes, note the time, mark the floor. Eddie, still in shock, was handcuffed and processed as evidence, then questioned. He asked the same question anyone asks in that moment. "Do you think I did this?" They told him it was procedure. Judy, distraught and intoxicated from the evening's holiday toasts, was kept in a patrol car for hours, pleading for updates and, at one point, even to be allowed to use a bathroom. Their 12-year-old, wide-eyed and shivering in a blanket, tried to explain what she'd heard. A frantic apology, a young man saying he had messed up. The young man at the center of the chaos, Ariana's boyfriend, sat in the back of a cruiser, blood on his shirt, talking mostly to himself. Patrol car video later captured fragments you can hear but never unhear. "My life's over right now, and look at me. I deserve everything. I'm so sorry for what I did." He had not been Mirandized. Detectives held off on a formal interview when he asked for a lawyer. Hours later, in a sterile interview room, a detective told him he would not be charged right now. It was early Christmas morning. Paperwork was already taller than a coffee cup. At the hospital, doctors fought to stabilize Ariana. The wound they were trying to reverse is the kind trauma teams train for and still dread. The kind where every second counts and the line between critical and fatal is as thin as the blade that made it. She would not survive. The medical examiner's office examined the body and, within days, ruled the manner of death homicide, the mechanism stabbed by others. That phrasing is clinical by design. It tells you 2 crucial things without telling you what you most want to know. Ariana did not do this to herself, and someone else did. Back at the house, detectives sketched a timeline with the ordinary tools of modern tragedy: phone logs, text threads, the ring of neighbors' door cameras, the 911 audio, fingerprints, fabric swabs, a ruined holiday table. In Ariana's room, they found a notebook where, more than a year earlier, she'd drawn a graphic horror movie tableau. Her dad said she loved to sketch. She wasn't suicidal. The image would become the kind of investigative detail that spawns more questions than answers. What mattered more in those first days were the basics the file kept repeating. Ariana was alive and well the evening of Christmas Eve. Her boyfriend was the only other person in the room when she suffered a fatal neck wound. The medical examiner called it a homicide by others. Neighbors filled in the perimeter. A couple 4 houses away swore they heard a man shout, "I'm going to kill you." Earlier that night, then a melee that sounded like furniture skidding across tile. Their memory, shaky, terrified, but consistent, tucked another piece into the puzzle. Evidence techs logged the boyfriend's blood-soaked clothes and photographed smears on surfaces that told the story of a household pinwheeling from quiet to panic in under a minute. A detective typed into the report that the boyfriend had said, "I had the knife." Another noted the same man's repeated insistence on a lawyer. Those details would be sifted later for meaning the way panners sift streambed gravel for flecks of gold. And because nothing in a homicide investigation happens on a single track, another story started at the same time the evidence boxes were sealed. The public won. Friends and family built a digital vigil around Ariana's photo. Brown eyes, a grin tilted toward mischief, the face of a kid on the edge of everything good. They repeated her firsts: job, license, boyfriend, as if saying them could pin the good parts to the page. They called for accountability in the tone families use when the clock has run out on patience. "Someone should be in jail," her dad said, shaking with a combination of sorrow and fury that tends to make anchors swallow hard between questions. Investigators, for their part, cautioned patience. They had a scene, a body, a statement of manner from the medical examiner, and a young man they could not legally compel to speak. They also had the responsibility to get it right, to correlate bloodstain patterns with movement, to reconcile witness recollections with timestamps, to test every knife in the kitchen, and to cross-reference anything that could place a blade in a hand. On paper, it sounds linear. In real life, it almost never is. Dozens of little facts need to agree with one another. If they don't, a prosecutor's standard line, "We file cases we can prove, not cases we feel," becomes the wall a grieving family runs into at speed. Christmas lights stayed up longer than usual that year on Ariana's street. Shrines tend to glow. Parents passed by in minivans and slowed at the curb, and for a second you could see them glance at their own daughters in the rearview mirror. The house itself settled back into silence, the chalk outlines long since washed away, vacuum tracks made by a family trying to live in a room that suddenly had 2 clocks, the one on the wall and the one that stopped around midnight on Christmas morning. Christmas morning 2021 began with fluorescent light and vinyl floors, the kind that squeak under paramedic boots. At the hospital, trauma teams worked in a cascade: airway, bleeding, pressure. Ariana's wound sat at the border where breath and voice are made, and the clock ran hot. Back at the house, deputies went room to room, whispering the choreography of every major crime scene. Clear, hold there, mark it. They strung tape across Beaumont Loop while the last carols of the night still clung to the neighborhood like static. What a home gives you. Privacy, comfort, routine turns instantly into a puzzle for strangers to solve. Inside, the story was still forming. Ariana's little sister, pulled from sleep by shouting, told a detective she heard a young man's voice saying he had messed up. She didn't see the blade. She saw the aftermath, her sister being carried by the hair toward the master bedroom, the kind of image that becomes a loop you can't shut off. Their mother, intoxicated after an evening of holiday toasts, was kept in the back of a patrol car for hours, pleading for an update, then for a bathroom. Their father, hands processed for evidence, kept insisting on the obvious. There was blood everywhere. His daughter couldn't speak. He had dialed for help. And the process kept insisting back. It's procedure. In the cruiser parked under the street lamp, the young man who'd been with Ariana in her room, her first boyfriend, 20-year-old Ramon Calderon Durst, mumbled into the quiet. Patrol car audio caught fragments that sounded like a conscience coming unraveled. My life's over right now, Yaks. Look at me. I deserve everything. I'm so sorry for what I did. The words fell into the record not as a confession, he hadn't been read his rights, but as spontaneous statements, the kind juries sometimes score heavily and sometimes discount as shock talking. Hours later, in a stark interview room under buzzing lights, a detective told him he wouldn't be charged right now. It was still dark on Christmas morning when he walked out. Meanwhile, another kind of record, the medical kind, was being set down with cold precision. The District 6 medical examiner documented Ariana's injuries and wrote the sentence that would anchor everything that followed: manner of death, homicide, cause, stab wound of the neck, mechanism, stabbed by others. Those three words, by others, locked a door behind Ariana and opened one in front of law enforcement. This wasn't self-inflicted. Someone else did it. The question shifted from what happened to who did this, and can we prove it? Investigators turned over the house with a methodical patience that looks like delay to anyone grieving. They noted a trail of blood from Ariana's bedroom to her parents' room, collected clothing, and swabbed surfaces, cataloged the knives in the kitchen and anything with an edge in the bedrooms. In Ariana's room, they found a sketchbook containing, among other drawings, a lurid horror image she'd made 15 months earlier of a woman with her throat cut. Her dad said Ariana loved scary movies and sketched elaborate scenes all the time. To him, it was no more predictive than a poster on a teenager's wall. On paper, though, the drawing slid into the file's Things to Weigh column, a thorny artifact investigators would debate against the much heavier fact of a medical examiner writing homicide. Witness accounts stiffened the timeline. A neighbor 4 houses down described hearing a man shout something like, "I'm going to kill you," followed by chaos. He ran toward the Tarsinski home and met a young man on the walkway soaked in blood when Ariana's father shouted, "You killed her!" The neighbor says the young man fired back, "What does it matter? I'm going to jail anyway." It's the kind of raw moment reporters repeat because it clarifies the stakes. Everybody in that frame knew a line had been crossed, but investigators have to translate it into elements a prosecutor can carry past a reasonable doubt threshold. From the first hours, the case carried 2 separate hearts: the family's, which is all pulse and memory, and a demand for urgency, and the legal system's, which is perfusion by evidence. Detectives learned that Ramon had moved to Florida from New Jersey, lived with his grandmother in Ocala, and worked as an electrician's apprentice in Orlando. Phone extractions showed an on-again, off-again teenage relationship with plenty of arguing, some of it the garden variety static of first love, some of it darker. The 911 recording captured both a father's panic and a second voice in the background insisting Ariana had grabbed a knife. Statements diverged. Spatter told its own story, and the medical examiner's signature hung over every page: homicide. By others? Weeks became months. The Hernando County Sheriff's Office said the case was open and active, that evidence had gone forward to prosecutors for a filing decision. The family heard the same sentence anyone in their position hears when they start calling every day. These things take time. They built a vigil online, their daughter's face ringed by Purple Hearts and the phrase "Justice for Ariana," and news outlets came to the driveway. Her parents spoke about Ariana's firsts, license, job, boyfriend, because it is unbearable to speak only about a last. They also spoke about the night and what they heard and saw. A doorway full of blood, a young man saying, "I had the knife." A hospital room where those who love you make decisions you never imagined they would have to make. In August 2023, the state attorney's office put its position in a letter. After reviewing what the sheriff's office had delivered, prosecutors said they would not file charges. The explanation was a law school sentence that lands like a brick on a kitchen table. While the medical examiner listed the death as a homicide, Florida courts have held that negligence alone, however catastrophic, cannot be prosecuted as a crime without proof of intent, the mens rea that turns a deadly act into a criminal one. The letter also noted there was no probable cause at that time to believe a crime had been committed by Ramon, and emphasized his constitutional right not to give a statement. Subtext for a grieving family: a silent suspect, a victim who can't speak, and a room nobody else saw is a prosecutorial canyon. To Ariana's parents, that logic felt like smoke. How could the government say, officially, that their child had been killed by others, and then say, just as officially, that nothing would be charged? They pointed to what was on tape and what was on paper: the neighbor's account, the 911 call's background voice, the patrol car soliloquy about deserving the hatred of the world and being so sorry for what I did, the "I had the knife" line noted in a detective's report. Isn't that enough to test in court? Isn't that what manslaughter is for? Cases where intent is murky, but the result is a death someone else caused? A policing expert shown the case file said what most professionals say when the public learns a homicide won't be charged. You don't need a confession to build a case. You need to knit together behavior before, during, and after with forensics that point in one direction. If a suspect refuses to talk, you go sideways. Friends, co-workers, old messages, new patterns, anything that gives the room context. But experts don't have to face a jury. Prosecutors do. And this prosecutor wrote that the evidence, as gathered, didn't clear the bar. By then, the family had rehearsed their story so many times the verbs felt carved. Was, shouted, bled, said. They marked Ariana's birthday with balloons. No one felt like inflating. They watched other tragedies reach resolution in court and tried not to keep score. They took calls from strangers who said they, too, had lost a child, and learned that grief has a club nobody wants to join. On their street, Christmas lights went up and down and up again over 2 more seasons, and the little loop of houses kept doing what neighborhoods do: trimming hedges, taking out bins, while one home held a different calendar entirely, one with only 2 dates that mattered. If part 2 felt like the corridor where grief and procedure echo off each other, part 3 is the room where those echoes have to be sorted into evidence, law, and what a jury would actually be allowed to hear. On paper, the case looks simple: an 18-year-old with a fatal stab wound to the neck, a medical examiner who ruled the death a homicide and specified stabbed by others, and a boyfriend who was present, covered in blood, and captured on a patrol car camera saying things like, "My life's over right now. I deserve everything. I'm so sorry for what I did." In real life, simple is rare, especially when the only living eyewitness with a full view of the bedroom refuses to give a statement. Start with the medical finding most people trip over. Homicide does not mean prosecutable murder. In a death certificate, homicide is a manner of death, not a charge. It tells you someone else caused it, not whether the state can prove intent, malice, or even culpable negligence beyond a reasonable doubt. Prosecutors don't file a manner. They file elements, specific boxes. The law demands be checked. For murder, that can mean an act plus intent. For manslaughter, it can mean an act plus culpable negligence so gross It shows a reckless disregard for human life. Between those poles runs a canyon of reasonable doubt arguments. Accident, self-defense, confusion in the dark, words said in shock. Next, the recordings. The 911 call caught two threads at once: a father screaming for help and, in the background, a young man blurting that he had messed up, talking about a knife, and insisting his life was over. The patrol car video extends that thread, an hour of a 20-year-old talking into the metal air of the back seat, looping back over the same phrases: remorse, doom, a sense that everything was already decided. To a grieving family, those are confessions. To a defense attorney, they are spontaneous utterances from a person in shock, not a clear, deliberate admission of intent. A judge might admit them as voluntary statements. A jury would be told to weigh the speaker's state of mind. And even if jurors believed every word, they'd still have to answer the law's question, not the moral one. Do these phrases prove a specific crime? Witness testimony adds shape, but not certainty. A neighbor 4 doors down described hearing a male voice shout something like, "I'm going to kill you," followed by chaos. He ran toward the house and met a young man drenched in blood. When Ariana's father yelled, "You killed her," the neighbor recalls the reply, "What does it matter? I'm going to jail anyway." Jurors tend to hear those moments as truth because they're raw and unplanned. Defense counsel counters with distance, darkness, adrenaline, and the fallibility of memory, especially for words shouted during a panic. Prosecutors know this, which is why they try to knit such testimony to physical corroboration. Physical evidence is a ledger that doesn't care who is grieving. Bloodstains traced a path from Ariana's room into her parents' room, consistent with the father's account of finding her at the threshold and the desperate attempt to help. Swabs were taken from surfaces and from clothing. Knives in the kitchen and other edged items were cataloged. None of that is the same as a video of the moment the blade met the neck. Without a confession or a direct eyewitness, forensic details have to carry intent, and that is a lot to ask of spatter and steel. If a suspect won't talk, investigators look sideways. Prior texts, threats, searches, but jurors in Florida will be instructed not to guess. If evidence leaves room for accident or a struggle gone catastrophically wrong, defense will point to the room that nobody else saw and ask for the benefit of the doubt. There is also the vocabulary of burden that families learn the hard way. Probable cause is enough to make an arrest. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the wall a prosecutor must climb in court. In many homicides, detectives arrest on probable cause and let the case ripen while the defendant sits in jail. Here, the calculus cut the other way. The only person who could supply motive, seek and in the sequence and state of mind declined to be interviewed and asked for an attorney. That's a constitutional right, not an omission the state can fix by force. A prosecutor looking at that fact pattern, homicide manner, spontaneous, remorseful statements, a neighbor's remembered threat, no direct account from the only other person in the room, has to choose between filing and risking an acquittal, or holding back and risking exactly what happened here, a family experiencing that decision as abandonment. The family's position is not abstract. It lives in specifics. They point to the neighbor's testimony about a threat, and to the father's description of a young man saying, "I had the knife." They point to the patrol car monologue about deserving the hatred of the world. They point to a line in an incident synopsis that describes Ariana being dragged by her hair toward the master bedroom, and the boyfriend saying, "I did this." They point, rightly, to the medical examiner's plain language, stabbed by others. And then they ask the question that lands like a gavel on a kitchen table. If not this, what would ever be enough? From the state's side of the table, the answer is maddening but consistent. Enough means a story, that cannot be reasonably read two ways. Could a defense raise accident? Could it argue that Ariana grabbed a knife and was fatally injured in a chaotic struggle? Could it argue the patrol car statements were shock, not intent? If the answer to any of those is maybe, some prosecutors will decline to file, especially when there is no history of prior violence documented by police and no digital breadcrumb, texts, searches, threats that nails down prelude and state of mind. Other prosecutors would roll the dice on manslaughter and try to let a jury sort it. This office chose not to. That decision drew a second wave of grief, public now, because private patience had run out. Ariana's parents invited cameras to their driveway and said out loud what many families only say to each other: someone should be in jail. They marked birthdays with candles that stood for an age Ariana would never reach. They posted the patrol car clips, not because the clips are definitive, but because they convey something a docket never can: the awful knowledge that a young man left that night and their daughter did not. They launched a page with a blunt title, Justice, her name, because it is unbearable for a life to be reduced to a letter from a state attorney's office. Meanwhile, the investigative file did what files do when cases aren't charged. It kept breathing, slowly. Cold case review isn't just for decades-old crimes. It's also what happens when new eyes, new science, or a new witness might move a case one notch. Sometimes it takes a single stitch to close a gap: a recovered search query, a corroborating text, a statement from someone the suspect spoke to in the hours after. Sometimes it doesn't come. Families live in that maybe, retracing seconds in their heads while the state retraces them on paper. If there is a lesson that belongs to this part of the story, it's that the gap between we think we know and we can prove is not a technicality. It's the foundation of criminal law. It protects the innocent. It also sometimes shelters the guilty when cases hinge on silence and a room with no cameras. That reality doesn't heal anything, but it explains how a death can be formally stamped homicide and still stall at the courthouse door. When a courtroom door doesn't open, families learn to build their own stage. That's what Ariana Petarsinski's parents did after the letter arrived in August 2023, saying prosecutors would not be filing charges at this time. They read the paragraphs until the words blurred. Manner of death listed as homicide. Yes, but Florida case law, the letter explained, had long required proof of intent or culpable negligence so gross as to show reckless disregard for human life. Without it, there was no case to take forward. To Eddie and Judy, it felt like someone had set two clocks and walked away. One that said, "Your child was killed by others," and one that said, "No one is responsible." So they took their proof to the only jury available, the public. They posted the patrol car video most people never see, the one where a 20-year-old sits alone and loops back over the same phrases until the metal air around him feels heavy. My life's over right now. I deserve everything. I'm so sorry for what I did. They clipped the part of the 9/11 recording where a second voice bleeds through a father's panic. They told the neighbor's story again, how he heard a threat and saw a young man drenched in blood, how he heard, "What does it matter? I'm going to jail anyway." And they kept repeating the sentence that anchors everything. The medical examiner ruled Ariana's death a homicide, stabbed by others. Investigative reporters started asking the questions families can't force into depositions. Why wasn't the boyfriend interviewed formally? Why were the most detailed statements in the record the ones he made to the air of a patrol car? Why, if the manner is homicide, does the case still live in a drawer marked open investigation? A policing expert, brought in by the TV station after reviewing the case file the parents obtained, said the quiet part out loud. You don't need a confession to build a case. You build from before, during, and after. Patterns of control, searches, statements to friends, physical evidence that makes accident implausible. Families already know this. They just needed someone in a suit to say it on the 6 o'clock news. The sheriff's office answered the way agencies do when a file is still breathing. The investigation remains open. Records that would compromise it can't be released. Detectives emphasized that statements made before rights are read aren't always the foundation people think they are, that juries hear shock as easily as they hear intent, and that the standard in a courtroom is not, "we think we know," it's, "we can prove." On paper, those sentences are correct. In a kitchen with a spare chair at the table, they sound like a foreign language. Meanwhile, the calendar filled itself with milestones that rub salt into every sentence. Ariana's 19th birthday came and went. The family posted a slab of cake with a single candle because buying a full sheet felt obscene. The second Christmas after the killing unfolded with the same decorations and none of the ease. Eddie taped letters to a poster board, evidence, me, like a man trying to teach himself a new alphabet. Judy listened to the 911 call once and then locked her phone because knowing the exact moment the world broke will drown you if you let it. When the news segment aired, strangers who had never met the Petarsinskis started saying her name. In their living rooms. The parents followed up with a page dedicated to their daughter, and the comments section turned into a digital vigil. Purple hearts, prayers, promises to keep watching. Some people posted the patrol car clip with captions that sound like verdicts, "He confessed." Others, more cautious, wrote what lawyers say when the cameras are off. If he won't talk and there's no video of the room, the file needs one more stitch. Either way, the attention rewired the case. Reporters filed new records requests. A local paper printed the prosecutor's letter in full. A long red blog laid out the sheriff's running case summary, including the line that still burns when you say it out loud. For an unknown reason, Ramon Calderon Durst slit Ariana Tarsinski's throat while in Ariana's bedroom and stated to Edward and Judy, "I did this." What happens after a segment airs is never guaranteed. Sometimes it jolts a witness who thought their detail didn't matter. Sometimes it shakes loose a search query from a cloud backup someone forgot to purge. And sometimes it just keeps a case in the light long enough that it cannot be quietly closed. For Ariana's parents, long enough is the only unit left that means anything. They know a case can change with a single text recovered, a single friend deciding a confidence has to be broken, a single forensic retest using a method that didn't exist in 2022. They also know none of that brings their daughter home. There were other paths to consider. Civil lawyers explained gently that wrongful death suits are about accountability, not prison, and that they live under a lower standard, preponderance of the evidence instead of beyond a reasonable doubt. A family can choose that path if the state won't or can't act, but it comes with new costs, money, time, and the relived pain of discovery, where opposing counsel picks apart the worst night of your life for months. Some families find purpose in that fight. Others choose to put their strength into the living. Scholarships, memorial gardens, training sessions that teach strangers how to read danger and leave sooner than their fear tells them they can. Eddie and Judy split the difference. They kept the pressure on officials with cameras rolling, and they reached for prevention in the same breath. At a candlelight gathering, they spoke between chimes of Silent Night about what Ariana had been doing right up until the minute she died, working her first job, carrying that temporary license like a trophy, texting dumb jokes to a little sister who still checks her phone as if the universe might apologize. Then they told a room full of teenagers what no one told them at that age. If the voice in your head says, "This doesn't feel right," it's not being dramatic. It's being alive. If you're scared of someone you also love, tell someone older and stubborn who will make it their business. If you are that older and stubborn person, don't wait for perfect proof. Show up, stand in the doorway, and be loud. The official line remained careful in 2024 and into 2025. The case is open. Lab work continues. We will not jeopardize a future prosecution by talking now. The parents' line remained simpler and harder. Our daughter's death was ruled a homicide. The person who was with her walked away. Help us close the gap between those sentences. Between those polls, a small community did what communities do. Dropped casseroles, posted her photo, corrected rumors when they flared, and learned a vocabulary they never wanted. Manner, mens rea, declination letter. If there's a place to leave this story for now, it's here. A room with 2 clocks, a file that still breathes, and a family that refuses to let the silence grow around their child's name. Ariana was 18. She had a new license, a first job, and Christmas lights reflecting off a phone screen she kept checking for no reason at all. The science says a single stitch could still close the case. The law says it needs more than sorrow to move. The people who loved her say they can carry both truths and keep going. One day, the file may get the thing it needs, an echo from a hard drive, a sentence from a witness, a test that wasn't possible when the lights were still up on Beaumont Loop. Until then, the Ptarsinskis will do what they have been doing since a holiday turned into a hinge. Light their porch, say their daughter's name into the camera, and ask anyone who knows something to pick up a phone. They won't stop dialing themselves. Justice moves at the speed of proof. Love moves faster. In this house, both are still awake. Thank you for watching The Witness Record. If Ariana's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss our next deep dive. Stay safe, stay observant, and look out for one another.